Haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Mem Amud Aleph, starting with Daf Lamed Tes Amud Beis, 10 lines from the bottom. The Mishnah taught us that the Kohen Gadol goes to the eastern part of the Azar to perform the Goral, to determine which of the he-goats is a Korban Chatos, La Hashem, and which of the he-goats then goes La Azazel. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yonai, Aliyos Goral Mitoich Kalpi Me'akevis. The Goral is Ma'akiv. If a person does not then, the Kohen Gadol does not make the Goral, then that will then be an essential component, being Ma'akiv, the whole Avodah. However, Rabbi Yonai goes on to say, Hanocha Eina Ma'akevis. The placement of that Goral is not essential, and therefore the fact that he takes out the right one, for example, and it's La Hashem, Chatos, so then that will be the corresponding he-goat on his right side. Whereas the one to the left, of course, will then correspond to the Azazel. So that's enough. And it's not ma'ak if he doesn't place the girl on the he-goat. Rabbi Yochanan argues, and he says, Af aliyah in ma'akif. Even if he does not do the girl, although it's true he's missing doing the mitzvah that's recorded in the Torah, but it's not ma'akev the avodah, and therefore if he merely makes a declaration and says the he-goat to his right is Chatos La Hashem and the he-goat to his left is La Azazel, that's also sufficient. Alibo de Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Now the Gemara is going to bring a machloikis that we'll see later on, but there's a machloikis gabe the avodah if it's not done in the sequential order that's necessary to be done. If it's not done in that way, is it ma'akev or not? In other words, Rabbi Nehemiah says that the white vestments that the Kohen Gadol is to wear when he does the avodah is not only going to be ma'akev if he doesn't do it in the right order, if it's inside in the Kodesh Kadoshim, but even if it's outside the Kodesh Kadoshim, in the Heichal or the Azar, it will be ma'akev. Rabbi Yehuda argues and he says only that which is inside the Kodesh Kadoshim, if it's done out of order, will be ma'akev. So the Gemara now wants to bring that machloikis tanoim and explain this machloikis how it corresponds. Says the Gemara, Aliba de Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda again, who holds that the order is not ma'akev if it's outside of the Kodesh Kadoshim. Da'omar dvar ma'anasim bebigdei lova mi bachus lo ma'akvei. Then everyone would agree, including Rabbi Yonai, that is not ma'akev. Lefi Rabbi Yehuda. Ki pligi alib de Rabbi Nehemiah. The machlok according to Rabbi Nehemiah, who does say that the white vestments avodah must be in order, whether it's inside the Kodesh Kodashim or even outside where the Azor is. Mandam ma'akev Rabbi Nehemiah. Rabbi Yonai, who says that's ma'akev the Goral, which is an avoid that's done in the Azara, outside the Kodesh Kadoshim. So he's like Rabbi Nehemiah and says that ma'akev. Uman da'omar loy ma'akva hanimili ba'avoida. Whereas the other one is not ma'akev, that's talking about the avoida that's going to be ma'akev, according to Rabbi Nehemiah. But hagrola lo avoidahi. The hagrola, the goral, is not avoida. So therefore it's not ma'akev, and therefore, again, that would be okay even according to Rabbi Nehemiah. Ikedama, the Gemara brings another version. Everybody agrees that according to Rabbi Nehemiah, that indeed it would be ma'akev. Again, because Rabbi Nehemiah says in avodah that the Kohen Gadol does with his dalid big day lavon, even outside of the Kodesh Kodashim, in this case, even in the Azara, will be ma'akev. So according to this, everybody would agree with him that it's ma'akev. So what's the machlekes then? Ki pligi alib de Rabbi Yehuda. They're arguing within Rabbi Yehuda's shita as follows: Man da Omar lo ma'akva ka Rabbi Yehuda. The one who says not ma'akev, that's very good, according to Rabbi Yehuda, because he says again, the only that's ma'akev is within the Kodesh Kadoshim, and this is in the Azara. Uman da Omar ma'akva. So what about the man da Omar who's ma'akev? How can he say, according to Rabbi Yehuda? Hocha, he says, shiny hocha. The Tana Beikro, the Pasuk says, Asher Ola Trei Zimni. It says Asher Ola twice. So the first time it can simply tell me that which was drawn, he picks up. But the fact that it says it twice is an emphasis to teach me that indeed it will be ma'akev, even over here in the Azara, even according to Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara now asks a question according to the second version, the Iked Amre, that we just said, according to Rabbi Nechemia, everybody would agree that it's ma'akev. Ask the Gemara, Meisvei, mitzvah lahagril. The Brisa says it's a mitzvah lahagril. The pashas it means lachar to say that you have to make a hagrola, a goral. Vim lo hirgril kosher. However, b'di'evet, if you did not make a goral, you weren't a magril, then it is kosher. So bishlam malach lishna da amris ali b'd Rabbi Yehuda kuliyam lo pligi de lo ma'akve hamani Rabbi Yehudi. According to the first lashon that says everybody agrees within Rabbi Yehuda that it's not ma'akev, then it's very good. The fact that he was magril, he was not magril b'di'evet, that's still kosher. That's very good. On top of Daf Mem Amud Aleph, Ella, says the Gemara, lahach lishna da amris pligi. But according to the second lashon that says that there's a machlokes, so then bishlama leman da amar lo ma'akva hamani Rabbi Yehudi. Very good, because the opinion that says that it's not ma'akev, so then you can then say that's like Rabbi Yehuda. However, as the Gemara, leman da amar ma'akva hamani, but the one who says it is ma'akev, namely Rabbi Yonai, right? Who is he going like? Because in that second lashon that we just said, he should say everybody would agree that it would be ma'akev. And yet this Bryce that we just quoted says that if he doesn't higril b'di'evet it's kosher. Answers the Gemara, Tnei mitzvah lahaniach. Learn that when it says lahagril, it doesn't mean making the goral. It means to say the girl really is essential, and therefore would be ma'akev. However, when it says lahagril, if he doesn't do it, then it's kosher, it means lahanocha. It means placing the girl on the he-goat. That is not ma'akev. Toshma, the Gemara asks another question. Again, this is against Rabbi Yonai in the Iked Amre. Rabbi Yonai in the Iked Amre states that everybody would agree that it is going to be ma'akev. And they're only arguing with Rabbi Yehuda. Ask the Gemara, following Brisa, Toshma, mitzvah lahagril uli hizvados. Lechatchil, it's a mitzvah to be magril and to confess on the seirim. Lo higril v'lo hizvade kosher. If he didn't do a goral and he did not confess, then b'di'evet it's kosher. So vichi teima hochanami lahaniach. You'll say it's not a kasha on Rabbi Yonai because here we're talking about that it's lahaniach, as we just answered before. Lahagril doesn't mean making a goral, but rather makes lahaniach. Goral would be essential, would be ma'akev, but lahaniach is what we're talking about over here. On that we're saying b'di'evet, if you didn't place the goral on the he-goats, then it's okay b'di'evet. So then we'll have a question if that's the case. Ein b'seifa. The Sefer of the Brisa says, Rabbi Shimon Omer, lo higril kosher. If he did not higril, it's kosher. Lo hisvade is puzzle. If he didn't masvade, if he didn't make a confession, then it would be puzzle. So the Gemara works it out. My lo higril. What does it mean to say that if he was not magril, it would be kosher? According to Rabbi Shimon. If you want to say it means lo hiniach, he didn't place the goral on the he-goats, then michlal, it would follow. The diuk would be the Rabbi Shimon, Sover Hagrola Ma'akva, that the goral would be Ma'akev. And that's difficult because we have a following verse that indicates otherwise. Vehatanya, Meis Echad Mehen, if you have two he-goats and you made the goral and one of them subsequently dies, Mevi Chaveir Shalom Behagrola, bring a second one so you don't have to make another Hagrola. Because if you have to make a goral again, then what you'd have to do is then you'd have to take two new he-goats and make a goral. So Rabbi Shimon doesn't like that because then one's going to have to then go to waste. There's going to be a problem because there'll be either two lahashems or two la'azozel. So therefore he prefers to then add one more he-goat in place of the one that died, and then don't make a goral. Div Rabbi Shimon. So we see from Rabbi Shimon in this brisa clearly that a goral is not essential. And yet, if you're going to learn before that when he says lo higril, it meant to say lo higril meant from the Tanakama meant not garal, but rather it meant hanocha. To which Rabbi Shimon says, he argues, and Rabbi Shimon says that lo higril is kosher, lo izvada is pasul. He only meant to say that lo higril is lahanocha, and then that would imply that the real garal would be yes ma'akev. Well, he sees that Rabbi Shimon in this brisa clearly says no, that even a garal itself is not ma'akev. So we can't learn that. We can't learn that lo higril means hanocha. Answers the Gemara, Rabbi Shimon lo yoda mai ka'amrei Rabbon. Here, Rabbi Shimon, who's answering the Tanakama, did not know clearly what was the intention, what did the Tanakama mean when he said the words that mitzvah hagril ula hazvados, but if he's lo higril lo izvada, then it's kosher b'di eved. What did he mean when he says lahagril? And this is what then Rabbi Shimon said back to the Tanakama. Hagrola mamish. If you meant to say that lo higril, and if he did so, then it's kosher b'di eved. That's what you meant. Hagrola. They made talking about a goral. Then ka'amrisu. That's what you meant to say. Palignu alaychu bechadam. I'm only arguing in regards to the vidui, that I require that vidui be done. If it's not, it's ma'akev. But I would agree with you that the goral mamish is not ma'akev. Hagrola ka'amrisu hainu hanacha. However, if you meant to say hagrola means hanacha, then palignu alaychu betarti. Then I argue with you on two counts. I require aleph that there be a hanacha, and beis that there be a vidui. And if you didn't do either one, it's ma'akev. That's Shita's Rabbi Shimon. Toshma, the Gemara now asks a new question from a new brisa onto Rabbi Yonai in the Iked Amrei. Again, Rabbi Yonai said that everybody agrees that the Hagrola is ma'akev. Says the Gemara, Toshma, par ma'akev es hasoyer. If you have a par in the avoida of the par, it will be ma'akev the seir. If you did a seir, something with the seir, the Gemara will explain, before the par, then that will be ma'akev. The par will be ma'akev the seir, and you'd have to then do the avoid of the seir again, of the he-goat again. However, it's the opposite. The seir ein ma'akev is a par. If you proceeded with a par before the seir, we'll explain shortly, then that will not be ma'akev. The brisa concludes, b'matonoi shebifnim. We're talking about the applications that are inside, referring to the Kodesh Kadoshim. And therefore, when it said in the beginning of the brisa, the par is ma'akev es ha-seir, if you put the applications of the seir in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, before putting the applications of the par in the Kodesh Kadoshim, it will be ma'akev. And therefore, you'd have to then go ahead and, after doing the par, do the seir, the he-goat applications again. Now, before we go further, it's essential for us to understand, in order for us to understand this Gemara, to take a look at Rashi in Dibur Masker Par Ma'akev Sasir. Rashi will tell us that there's really an order based on the Torah's psukim of the avoida, and therefore the avoida is as follows. Says Rashi, Im hikdir achas min avoida shel seir hamuchara l'shel par v'asa koydem the par. If you were preceding one of the avodas of the he-goat before the par, then we're talking about being ma'akev. Hapar shehu roy likadem lo is ma'akeva. Then the par will ma'akev the seir, whereby you'd have to do then the seir's avoida again after the par. Upois laveino oilaloi v'tzor lachzu la'asois la'achar par. Now Rashi tells us the seder ha'avoida right now, which really essentially there's 10 different points over here. The seder ha'avoida sen kachi b'parsha betchila misvad al par vidu rishon. The first is that the Kohen Gadol makes a vidui, which is called vidui rishon, on his par. Then he makes the goral of the he-goats. Then he makes a second confession on his par, and he shechs that par. Then what he does is he goes inside the Kodesh Kodashim with the kaf and the machta. That means with the ketores and the coals, and he burns the ketores in the Kodesh Kadoshim. V'noisim midam apar al ha-kaparis. The next thing he does, he makes an application of the dam apar on the kaparis, which is inside the Kodesh Kadoshim, on the ark, on the Aron. Then he shechs the seer, which is achatas la Hashem, and he takes that blood and he makes also an application in the Kodesh Kadoshim by the kaparis. Then he takes the blood of the par and makes an application of the paroiches and the heichal. Then he takes the blood of the soyer and he puts an application of the paroiches in the heichal. And then finally, finally he takes the blood, mixes the blood of the seir with the blood of the par, and he then takes that mixture and he makes an application on the inner mizbeach. So there's 10 steps. The first is vidui of the first confession of the par, of his par. The second one is then making the girl of the 2 he-goats. The third is then making a confession, a second confession of his par and shechting it. The fourth is taking the kaf and the machta, going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim and burning the ketaras. The fifth then takes the dam of the par and makes an application on the kapares. The sixth is shechting the seer la Hashem. The seventh is taking the dam of the seer la Hashem and making an application inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim of the kapares. The eighth one is taking the dam of the par and making a application in the heichal by that paroches. And then the ninth is taking the dam of the seer of the chatos and putting that dam in the heichal on the paroches. And finally mixing the 2 bloods of the seir and the par and putting an application on the inner mizbeach. Now we can go ahead and understand what the Gemara is going to say now, based on this order. Says the Gemara, Bishlama par me'akev es ha'sa'ir. We understand the first statement of the Brisa that the par is me'akev the seir, which means to say that if you did the application of the seir before the par, then you'll have to do the application of the seir once again after the par, because the par will be me'akev the seir. Di akdemei l'seir, the Gemara explains that if you would proceeded with the seir mikame par before the par's application, loy avad v'loy klum, then he didn't do anything. In other words, he was supposed to, in the order be done, put the application of the blood of the par inside the Kodesh Kadoshim, and then the blood of the seer inside the Kodesh Kadoshim. But if he flipped around the order, then he'll still have to do the application of the blood of the seer once again after the par. So that is understood. Elasir ein ma'akev es hapar ma'nihu. But ask the Gemara, what is the second statement of the Brisa that if you made you did the par's avodah before the seer, that the seer is ma'akev es hapar, is not ma'akev es hapar? Ileimo, if you want to say di akti matonos the par behechal mikame batonos the seer befnim. If you want to say that he first preceded the par's application of the heichal before the blood of the seir went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, then that can't be. Chulka k'siv behu. It says in the pasuk chulka, and therefore there's a hakpada on the order. That for sure is going to be ma'akiv. Elulav does not therefore mean the aktim matones the par bifnim mikame hagrola. Does not mean that he was maktim the application of the par inside before he then did the hagrola, before he was magril and did the garal of the shtei seirim. Umedesidro loy ma'akva ikra hagrola nami loy ma'akva. And from the fact that the seder is not ma'akev, then it would also then say, therefore, that the ikr hagoral, the hagrola itself, is not ma'akev, and therefore it's a kasha and Rabbi Yonai, who does say it is ma'akev. Says the Gemara, it's not a kasha on Rav Yonai because loy the aktim matonos the parmi mizbeach mekam matonos the sir behechal. What it means to say is that he first puts the application of the par on the mizbeach, which is really a mixture of the together with the seer but he puts the par on the mizbeach, that blood on the mizbeach, in the inner mizbeach, before he takes the application of the blood of the seir and puts it on the heichal. Rabbi Yehuda he, and it's according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Omar dvarim hanasim b'bidei loven bechutz loy ma'akfei. If he does such an avodah which is outside of the Kodesh Kadashim, out of order, it's not ma'akev. That's the shita Rabbi Yehuda. Ask the Gemara, this is not a good explanation because it said in the Braisa that the matanas that we're talking about are the matanas that are bifnim, the applications that are inside the Kodesh Kadoshim. And you're telling me that you made an application of the heichal out of order. So it can't be what the Braisa means. Elohamani Rabbi Shimon he. Rather, the Gemara says the Braisa is authored by Rabbi Shimon. The Omad Hagrola loy ma'akva. That the Hagrola is not ma'akev, like we saw before in the Braisa. The Rabbi Shimon's shita is different than all the other Tanoim. He holds that the Goral itself is not ma'akev. And Rabbi Yanai, of course, goes like the other Tanoim. V'i boy se'im, if you want, you can alternatively say another Yishuv. La'olam Rabbi Yehudi, it is indeed Rabbi Yehuda. How can it be according to Rabbi Yehuda? We just asked. V'nihi de besidra loy ma'akev. Granted, the Seder is not ma'akev, because Shittas Rabbi Yehuda is that the Seder is not ma'akev for an avodah that is done outside the Kodesh Kadashim. Because this is an avodah shebachutz. What we're talking about over here is the Seder of doing the Hagrola outside. However, the Hagrola itself, Miyah is ma'akva, because we learned before on Amud Beis that there's a pasuk that says twice, Asher Allah, teaching you there's a hakpada that in regards to the essential Goral, even Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that it is ma'akev. And therefore you can learn that this indeed is the shita of Rabbi Yehuda as well, and therefore it's not a kasha on Rabbi Yonai.